The summer Della Pruitt turned 11, she started hauling things other farmers threw away. Every Saturday morning, she'd pedal her bicycle down the dirt roads of Callaway County, Kentucky, stopping at the edges of fields where old equipment sat rusting in the grass. She wasn't looking for scrap metal to sell. She wasn't building a fort. She had a single, quiet purpose, and she wasn't telling anyone what it was. She knocked on doors. She asked politely, and farmer after farmer said the same thing. "Sure, honey, help yourself." Then they'd lean against their porch rails and watch her wrestle broken aluminum irrigation pipes into a wooden trailer her father had built her. And they'd chuckle, the gentle, confused kind of laughter that comes not from cruelty, but from complete bafflement. An 11-year-old girl, collecting old pipes. By the time August arrived, she had more pipe than some of the working farms in the county, and she hadn't explained herself to a single soul. Nobody knew what she was planning, not even her father, but they were about to find out. If stories of determination, family, and the quiet wisdom hidden in ordinary places move you, subscribe and join us every week. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to know how far this story has traveled. Callaway County sits in the western corner of Kentucky, where the land rolls gently toward the Tennessee River, and summers arrive over-delivered. By July, the sky turns the color of old brass. The air smells of turned earth and diesel and drying hay. It was the kind of place where families had farmed the same ground for 4 generations and weren't embarrassed to say so. Della Pruitt was the middle child of 3, born to Harlan and June Pruitt, who worked about 40 acres of river bottom land. Harlan grew corn and soybeans, occasionally tobacco when the price made sense. He was a methodical man, deliberate in speech, patient in all things except drought, which tested him the way nothing else did. June kept a kitchen garden of extraordinary ambition: tomatoes, peppers, squash, pole beans strung on hand-cut cedar stakes. She was the one who first put seeds in Della's hands when Della was barely old enough to reach the soil without bending her knees. Della's grandmother, Opal, lived in a small room off the back of the farmhouse. She was 81 years old and spent most mornings at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and old agricultural extension pamphlets she'd been collecting since the 1960s. She read them the way other people read novels. It was Opal who first noticed that Della was watching the fields differently than other children did. Not looking at the crops, looking at the water, where it pooled, where it ran off, where the soil cracked first in dry weather, where it stayed dark the longest after rain. The summer Callaway County entered its 3rd year of below-average rainfall. Della began to see a problem that the adults around her had simply learned to live with. Her father's soybeans were suffering in the upper fields, where the soil was sandier and water moved through it too fast to do much good. The county extension agent, a steady-natured man named Clifton Barr, had come out twice to look at the situation and offered what advice he could. Irrigate more frequently, mulch around the base of plants to retain moisture. But irrigating more frequently cost money and burned diesel. And there was never enough water pressure to run the lines up to the high ground without the system losing efficiency halfway across the field. Della listened to every word Clifton Barr said. She asked questions he wasn't used to hearing from 11-year-olds. If the pressure drops going uphill, what happens to the water that never makes it to the top? Clifton paused. It just stops, sits in the line. She nodded slowly, the way a person nods when they've already thought about something for a long time and just needed one more piece to confirm it. That was in May. By June, she had started collecting pipes. Here is what Della understood, and what most of the adults around her had never quite put together. Water doesn't care about cost. It only cares about gravity. The upper fields on her father's farm sat about 14 feet higher than the pond at the bottom of the property, a small, spring-fed basin that had never gone dry, not even in the worst summers. 14 feet of elevation, that's all it was, and Della had been reading Opal's old pamphlets. She'd learned about drip irrigation, delivering water directly to plant roots through slow emitters rather than overhead sprinklers, using up to 60% less water because none of it evaporates off hot soil or runs down a slope unused. She'd also read about gravity-fed systems, old designs from before electric pumps existed, where water at a higher elevation flows downhill through pipes to reach lower fields. The pond on her father's farm sat below the damaged fields, so that wouldn't work. But there was a seasonal catchment, a shallow draw on the north edge of the property, where rainwater pooled naturally after storms, standing for days before soaking in or drying up. That draw sat above the problem fields, by about 9 feet. 9 feet of elevation, routed through the right pipe network. That was enough head pressure to drip irrigate a 1/4 acre without running a single pump, and she had the pipes to build it. What she built that summer was not elegant. It was a child's version of an engineer's idea, assembled with mismatched PVC fittings, sections of old aluminum lateral pipe her father had replaced 3 years earlier, and a roll of drip tape she'd bought at the farm supply store in town, using money she'd saved from selling eggs. She dug shallow trenches by hand. Her father watched from a distance the first weekend, said nothing, and then quietly went to get a shovel and helped her dig without asking what she was building. That was Harlan's way. Her older brother, Cass, thought the whole thing was a waste of summer. Her younger sister, Wren, thought it looked like a science project and stayed close, handing Della tools she didn't always need. The first attempt failed. The connections at the collector basin weren't tight enough, and the whole system leaked at 3 separate joints before it got 10 yards down the slope. Della refitted every connection with plumber's tape and tried again. The second attempt built enough pressure to reach the first row of plants, but barely. The emitters delivered a thin, irregular trickle. Some plants got water, most didn't. She went back to Opal's pamphlets. She found a passage about pipe diameter and flow rate, how the width of a pipe determines not just how much water moves, but how quickly pressure equalizes across a run. The sections she'd used on the main line were too narrow. She needed to step up the diameter at the collector and step it back down at the emitter lines. She spent 2 weeks trading pipe sections with a retired farmer named Wendell Coe, who had a barn full of irrigation equipment from a commercial vegetable operation he'd closed in 2009. He let her trade her smaller pipe for his larger sections, and he did it without charging her, because he said he liked her stubbornness. On the third attempt, the system worked. The soybeans in the upper field were, by mid-August, the healthiest plants on the farm. Harlan noticed first. He walked the rows twice before saying anything. The soil was dark and moist. The leaves were deep green, upright and wide, the posture of plants that weren't stressed. In the neighboring rows where the gravity-fed lines hadn't yet reached, the same soybean variety was pale and beginning to curl from heat stress. He went to find his daughter. She was adjusting an emitter near the top of the run, lying flat in the dirt to reach it. He stood there a moment looking at her. "How much water is this thing using?" he finally asked. She told him. The number was about 40% of what his conventional system used to deliver the same area. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "You want to extend it to the east field?" Clifton Barr came back in September, officially. He walked the whole system with Della, asking questions and taking notes. He had the posture of a man recalibrating something. He said he'd never seen a gravity-fed drip network, built from salvaged materials, produce results like this on a family farm. He asked if he could bring an agricultural engineering student from Murray State out the following spring. A reporter from the county paper came too, eventually. She wrote a feature that ran on the front page below the fold. The headline called Della a young innovator. Della thought the word was embarrassing. By the time October arrived, word had traveled. The farmers who had handed Della their old pipes, the ones who had chuckled from their porch rails, drove out to see for themselves. They came expecting to be polite. They were not prepared for what they found. The upper field was a different color than every other field in the county. While neighboring rows stood thin and yellowed from the long, dry summer, Della's soybeans were dense and deeply green, the canopy so full it nearly blocked the soil beneath. The plants stood straight, heavy with pods, every leaf facing upward, like they had something to be proud of. A few of the farmers walked the rows without saying a word. One of them pulled a pod and split it open with his thumbnail. He looked at it for a long moment, then looked at the 11-year-old girl standing at the edge of the field with dirt on her boots. "What'd you do different?" he asked. She showed them the pipes, the draw, the gravity, the emitters running slow and steady just below the surface, delivering water directly to the roots without wasting a drop to evaporation or runoff. The same water those men had never thought twice about letting puddle and disappear. She walked them through every junction, every fitting, every length of salvaged aluminum that had once been destined for a scrap pile. The laughter was gone. In its place was something quieter, something that takes longer to arrive than laughter, but lasts considerably longer. Several of them asked Della if she'd help them lay something similar before next planting season. She said she would. Masanobu Fukuoka, the Japanese farmer and philosopher, once wrote, "The ultimate goal of farming is not the growing of crops, but the cultivation and perfection of human beings." Della Pruitt grew soybeans that summer, exceptional soybeans, water-efficient, soil-healthy, drought-resistant soybeans that outperformed fields managed by people with decades of experience. But that wasn't the harvest. The harvest was something harder to measure. The patience of a child who watched water instead of yields. The willingness to ask for things people considered worthless. The discipline to fail twice and build again without complaint. Real agricultural knowledge rarely comes from expensive equipment. It comes from paying attention, from understanding that what others discard still has purpose if you're willing to figure out what it is. Della is 12 now. She's already designing an expanded system for the East Field. Wendell Coe is helping her with the math. Opal is still reading pamphlets. And the pipes that once rusted at the edges of fields across Callaway County are, now, growing things. What farming lessons stayed with you from Della's story? Drop it in the comments. We read every one. Tell us where you're watching from. This community reaches further than you'd think, and if stories like this one matter to you, subscribe. We'll be back next week with another.